50 most beautiful places to visit. In Europe, 4K travel guide. On the night of November 12, 2019, the sirens of Venice screamed for hours as the tide gauge at Punta della Salute climbed past 187 centimeters, the second highest flood level ever recorded in the city's 1100-year history. Water poured over the marble steps of St. Mark's Basilica for only the sixth time in 13 centuries. Gondolas smashed against ancient stone. Shopkeepers waded through knee-deep salt water trying to save centuries-old books and paintings before they dissolved into pulp. For a few terrifying hours, engineers and historians alike feared that one of the most beautiful cities ever built by human hands might simply be swallowed by the sea it had tamed for 1,000 years. Venice survived that night, barely, and the world was reminded of something unsettling. Even the most breathtaking corners of Europe are fragile, temporary, balanced on a knife's edge between splendor and disaster. That single flood became a wake-up call for millions of travelers who suddenly understood that these places will not wait forever. The glaciers are shrinking, coastlines are shifting, and ancient stones are wearing thin under the weight of centuries. So before more of this continent's magic slips away, we are going to take you on an urgent journey through the 50 most beautiful places in Europe, the destinations you need to see with your own eyes, before time, tide, or crowds change them forever. That flood was not an isolated warning either. In the years since, alpine glaciers have retreated so quickly that some Swiss ski resorts have started wrapping entire glaciers in reflective blankets each summer just to slow the melt, and parts of the Mediterranean coastline are eroding faster than geologists predicted only a decade ago. Every year, more than 700 million people cross into this continent, chasing something they can rarely name. Some say it is history. Others say it is art, or food, or the pull of landscapes unlike anything else on Earth. But the real answer runs deeper than any single reason. Europe holds pockets of the world where the clock seems to have simply stopped, where traditions older than most nations still breathe in daily life. It is not a museum. It is a living, shifting tapestry stitched together from dozens of cultures, each one insisting on telling its story a little differently. Medieval towns, soaring cathedrals, volcanic islands, and mirror-still lakes all exist within a few hours of each other, and together they have made this the most visited continent on the planet. Here is where the journey begins. Start in the Loire Valley in France, where more than 300 chateaux rise out of the morning mist along a single river. Chambord alone contains 426 rooms, a number so absurd that historians still argue about why one chateau needed so many. Chenonceau stretches directly across the river Cher like a bridge built for royalty, and Amboise still carries whispers of Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his final years there under the protection of King Francis I, and is believed to be buried within its chapel walls. Villandry's gardens are laid out with such mathematical precision that they look painted rather than planted. Visit in September when the grape harvest turns entire villages into open-air festivals, and the vineyards blaze gold and violet. Local markets fill with the scent of fresh bread and regional cheese, and the mild autumn air makes it possible to explore several chateaux in a single day without the exhaustion that summer heat usually brings. Head south into Andalusia, Spain, a region where 6 cities carry 6 completely different accents of the same Moorish Christian story. Seville's real Alcazar hides courtyards where Islamic geometry and Gothic stonework sit side by side, a rare architectural peace treaty frozen in tile and plaster. Granada holds the Alhambra, a fortress palace where engineers diverted mountain water through channels so precise that fountains still run today exactly as they did 800 years ago. Cordoba's Mesquita was once the second largest mosque on earth before a cathedral was built directly inside it, an act of architectural collision that somehow works. Ronda straddles a canyon so deep that the new bridge spanning it took 42 years to complete, and at least 2 of its original engineers reportedly died attempting to finish it. May is the month locals wait for, when flower-covered patios burst open across Cordoba during its centuries-old patio festival, and homeowners compete for the title of the most spectacular courtyard, a tradition recognized by UNESCO as an example of living cultural heritage passed down through generations of the same families. Sicily and Sardinia make up Italy's island crown. Mount Etna, Europe's tallest active volcano, has erupted so often that entire villages have been rebuilt on top of older buried ones, layer after layer of human stubbornness. Nearby, the Aeolian island of Stromboli has erupted almost continuously for the past 2,000 years, earning the nickname Lighthouse of the Mediterranean, because sailors could once navigate by its glow alone. Sardinia's Costa Smeralda, meanwhile, hides some of the clearest water in the entire Mediterranean, while the beaches of Cala Luna are reachable only by boat or by hiking through limestone gorges. The best window to visit both islands stretches across May, June, and September, when the sea has warmed enough for swimming, but the punishing heat of the Italian summer has not yet arrived, and wildflowers still blanket the hillsides with color. Norway's Lofoten Islands feel like a hallucination the first time you see them. Jagged granite peaks erupting directly out of the Arctic Ocean, with red fishermen's cabins called roerboer perched on stilts above the water. For centuries, this archipelago has supplied much of Europe with dried cod, a trade so old that Vikings were already exporting Lofoten fish to Italy 1,000 years ago. In summer, the sun never fully sets, and in winter it vanishes for weeks, replaced by the green fire of the aurora borealis dancing over the fjords. Fishermen still haul cod through these same frigid channels their ancestors worked, and sea eagles patrol the cliffs while pods of orcas and humpback whales pass through the surrounding waters during the annual herring migration. Switzerland answers with the Alps. The Matterhorn rises in near-perfect isolation above Zermatt, a village that banned combustion engine cars back in 1961, decades before car-free town became a trend. The Bernina Express climbs through 55 tunnels and viaducts to cross an altitude gain of over 2,000 meters without a single mechanical assist, an engineering feat once considered impossible for a train. Grindelwald sits beneath the Eiger's north face, a wall of rock so lethal to climbers that it was nicknamed Mordwand, the murder wall, in the 1930s. Nearby, steamboats older than a century still cross Lake Lucerne and Lake Thun, ferrying travelers between medieval villages exactly as they did when the boats first launched. And the fairytale silhouette of Schillon Castle rises straight out of Lake Geneva's waters. Bavaria, in Germany, gave the world its most photographed castle. Neuschwanstein was commissioned by King Ludwig II, a monarch so obsessed with fantasy and opera that his own government eventually declared him mentally unfit, just days before his mysterious drowning death in 1886. Walt Disney later used Neuschwanstein's silhouette as the direct inspiration for Sleeping Beauty's castle, meaning a 19th century Bavarian king unintentionally shaped how millions of children imagine fairy tales today. Munich's Glockenspiel still performs its mechanical dance 32 times a day. And each September, Oktoberfest draws roughly 6 million visitors who, together, drink an estimated 7 million liters of beer in just over 2 weeks. Along the romantic road, walled towns like Rothenburg, Ob der Tauber, and Nördlingen still look almost exactly as they did 500 years ago. Their squares once filled with merchants, and now filled with visitors, chasing that same sense of frozen time. Hallstatt in Austria looks almost too perfect to be real. A cluster of wooden houses stacked against a mountainside and mirrored in a glacial lake. The town is so picturesque that a Chinese company built a full-scale replica of it in Guangdong province in 2012, reportedly triggering minor protests from Hallstatt residents unhappy about crowds photographing what is essentially a copy of their home. Beneath the town lies one of the oldest salt mines on the planet, worked continuously for more than 7,000 years. Boats still cross the lake every hour, offering a new angle on the same view painters and photographers have chased for generations. And in the evening, lights from the wooden houses spill across the water in a reflection that has made this tiny village one of the most photographed places in the entire country. Croatia's islands of Hvar and Korčula carry centuries of Venetian influence in their walls and harbors. Korčula's old town is shaped like a fishbone, specifically to block the freezing winter bora winds, an urban design trick that still works exactly as intended centuries later. The local legend insists Marco Polo was born here, and a stone house still stands claiming the title, even though historians remain divided on whether the explorer ever set foot on the island at all. Hvar, meanwhile, guards a Venetian fortress above its harbor, and its lavender fields have supplied perfume makers across Europe for well over a century. The Greek islands need no introduction, yet Santorini's story is more violent than most visitors realize. Around 1600 BC, a volcanic eruption here was so powerful it may have wiped out the Minoan settlement at Akrotiri and possibly inspired the legend of Atlantis. Ash from that single eruption has been found as far away as Egypt and Turkey, and some historians still argue the disaster contributed to the decline of Minoan civilization itself, one of the Bronze Age's most advanced societies. Mykonos took the opposite path, transforming from a quiet windmill port into one of Europe's most famous nightlife destinations within a single generation, and Crete still guards the ruins of Knossos, the sprawling Bronze Age palace linked to the myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth. Portugal's Algarve coast has been shaped almost entirely by water. Ponta da Piedade's sea caves and golden cliffs are only fully explorable by kayak or small boat, and many of them remain unnamed on official maps. Sagres, at the extreme southwestern tip of continental Europe, was once believed by Prince Henry the Navigator's sailors to be the literal edge of the known world before Portuguese expeditions proved otherwise in the 15th century. Nearby Lagos still keeps sections of its old Moorish walls standing, and every morning fishing boats return to its harbor carrying the day's catch just as they have for centuries. Italy's Amalfi coast runs along a single, terrifying, gorgeous road that clings to cliffs for over 50 kilometers. Positano has no flat streets at all. Locals joke that you can tell a tourist by whether they are still smiling on the walk back uphill. Ravello's Villa Simbrone offers a terrace nicknamed the Terrace of Infinity, a viewpoint so famous that Greta Garbo reportedly hid there for weeks in 1938 to escape public attention. Amalfi town itself once ruled as an independent maritime republic centuries before Venice rose to prominence, and its cathedral still blends both Eastern and Western architectural styles as a reminder of that trading past. Barcelona blends Gothic alleys with architecture that seems to defy gravity altogether. The Sagrada Familia has been under construction since 1882, meaning it has now taken longer to build than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it is still not finished, with a projected completion date sometime in the 2030s, more than a century after Antoni Gaudí's death. Parc Güell was originally designed as a failed luxury housing development before the city purchased it and turned it into public parkland, an accidental gift to millions of future visitors. La Rambla still runs through the city's heart beneath century-old plane trees, and the Boqueria market fills each morning with vendors selling fish, jamon, and produce beneath its original iron and glass roof. Norway's fjords carve so deeply into the coastline that Sognefjord alone reaches over 1 to 300 meters below sea level in places, deeper than most of the surrounding mountains are tall. Geiranger Fjord's Seven Sisters waterfall drops from a cliff face directly into the water, and local legend claims a bachelor waterfall on the opposite cliff, called the Suitor, has been flirting unsuccessfully with the sisters for centuries. Scotland's Isle of Skye hides landscapes so alien that Ridley Scott filmed portions of Prometheus among the Quirang's shifting cliffs, formed by a landslide that is technically still moving today. The Old Man of Storr, a basalt pinnacle jutting from the hillside, was formed roughly 60 million years ago by volcanic activity and glacial erosion working together over unimaginable stretches of time. Transylvania in Romania is more historically layered than its vampire reputation suggests. Bran Castle is marketed worldwide as Dracula's castle, yet Bram Stoker likely never visited it and probably never even saw an illustration of it while writing his 1897 novel. The real historical figure often linked to the legend, Vlad III, was born not in Bran, but in the walled city of Sigashora, where his childhood home still stands on a cobblestone street lined with 500-year-old guildhouses. The Faroe Islands, technically part of Denmark, are so remote that some villages were connected to the rest of the archipelago only within the last few decades, through undersea tunnels blasted directly through volcanic rock. Sheep here reportedly outnumber people nearly 2 to 1, and the island's name may even derive from the Old Norse word for sheep itself. Cappadocia in Turkey looks like the surface of another planet because, in a sense, it is the product of ancient volcanic ash that eroded over millions of years into thousands of cone-shaped fairy chimneys. Beneath this surreal landscape lies Derinkuyu, an underground city descending roughly 85 meters and capable of sheltering an estimated 20,000 people along with their livestock during historical invasions. Complete with ventilation shafts engineers still study today. Lake Como in Italy has attracted the wealthy and famous for over 2,000 years, ever since Roman writer Pliny the Younger built villas along its shores. Its depth exceeds 400 meters in places, making it one of the deepest lakes in Europe, deep enough that its bottom sits below sea level. The Canary Islands, scattered off the coast of Africa but politically part of Spain, feel like 7 completely different planets. Tenerife's Mount Teide is not only Spain's highest peak, but also, measured from the ocean floor, one of the tallest volcanic structures on the planet. La Gomera preserves Silbo Gomero, a whistled language once used to communicate across the island's steep ravines, recognized by UNESCO as a masterpiece of human heritage. Iceland sits directly atop the boundary between the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates, meaning the island is quite literally tearing itself apart at a rate of about 2 centimeters every year. Vatnajökull Glacier alone covers roughly 8% of the country, hiding active volcanoes beneath ice thick enough to create otherworldly blue ice caves each winter. Reykjavik heats almost its entire housing stock using geothermal water pulled directly from underground, making it one of the greenest capital cities on Earth, almost by geological accident. Lake Ohrid in North Macedonia is one of the oldest lakes on the planet, estimated at over 1 million years old, and it shelters more than 200 species found absolutely nowhere else on Earth. The Lorelei Rock, rising 132 meters above the river's narrowest bend, was blamed by sailors for centuries of shipwrecks, giving rise to the legend of a siren whose song lured boatmen to their deaths on the rocks below. Marksburg Castle, standing intact since 1117, is the only fortress along the entire river that has never once been destroyed, a survival record almost unheard of in a region that has seen centuries of war. The Albanian coast remained almost entirely closed to Western tourism until the early 1990s, sealed off under one of Europe's most isolated communist regimes. That decades-long isolation accidentally preserved beaches and coves that would otherwise have been developed decades earlier, leaving Summiel's turquoise waters looking largely untouched even today. Nearby, the ancient ruins of Butrint carry over 25 centuries of layered history, with Greek, Roman, and Venetian structures all standing within the same small archaeological site. Provence in France transforms every July into an ocean of purple as lavender fields bloom across the plateau surrounding Sinanke Abbey, where Cistercian monks have lived according to a self-imposed vow of silence since the 12th century. Roussillon sits atop one of the largest ochre deposits in the world, and its buildings are painted in 17 distinct natural shades sourced directly from the surrounding cliffs. Tuscany's Val d'Orcia became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, specifically because Renaissance-era planners deliberately redesigned its landscape as an idealized vision of the perfect countryside, meaning the natural beauty tourists photograph today is, in large part, 500-year-old landscape architecture. Florence, nearby, is home to Brunelleschi's Dome, a structure so structurally daring that when completed in 1436 without any external scaffolding support, contemporaries genuinely believed divine intervention was involved. Bruges in Belgium was once one of Europe's most important trading ports until its access canal to the sea silted up in the 15th century, effectively freezing the city in time and inadvertently preserving its medieval core almost perfectly for the tourists of today. Tallinn's Old Town in Estonia contains one of Europe's oldest continuously operating pharmacies, documented since 1422, where medieval remedies were once dispensed from the very same building still standing on Town Hall Square. Prague's astronomical clock has operated since 1410, making it the third oldest astronomical clock in the world, and the oldest still working. Legend claims the clockmaker was blinded after finishing it, so he could never build another one to rival it, though historians consider this story almost certainly a myth invented centuries later. Edinburgh's castle sits atop an extinct volcano, and beneath its old town lie sealed vaults where families reportedly lived in cramped, windowless chambers well into the 19th century before being abandoned and rediscovered generations later. Krakow in Poland escaped the devastation of the Second World War almost entirely intact, largely because retreating German forces did not have time to fully demolish the city, leaving it one of the few major Central European centers with its medieval core still fully preserved. Kotor in Montenegro hides behind nearly 5 kilometers of Venetian fortress walls that climb directly up a mountainside, with over 1,300 steps leading to a fortress overlooking one of the most dramatic bays in the entire Mediterranean. Ghent in Belgium was, during the medieval period, larger and wealthier than both London and Paris combined, a fact almost entirely forgotten today outside academic circles, thanks to the city's dominance of the European wool and textile trade. Budapest's thermal baths sit atop more than 100 natural hot springs, a geological gift that made the city one of the world's great bathing destinations for over 2,000 years, dating back to Roman occupation. London's Big Ben has kept time since 1859, surviving direct bombing during the Blitz of the Second World War with only minor damage to its clock face, a resilience that has since become a symbol of the city itself. Plitvice Lakes in Croatia contain 16 terraced lakes connected by waterfalls, and the entire park is essentially still forming today, as dissolved limestone continues to build new natural dams year after year, meaning the landscape is technically never finished. Salzburg's fame as a musical city is no accident. Mozart was born here in 1756, and The Sound of Music was filmed extensively across its lakes and gardens in 1965, cementing the city's identity as a place where music quite literally shaped tourism. Madrid and Toledo together tell the story of Spain's layered religious history, with Toledo once home to thriving Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities that coexisted, traded, and built side by side for centuries before the Reconquista changed the city forever. The Dolomites were once an ancient coral reef, meaning the jagged peaks climbers scale today were formed underwater millions of years ago before tectonic forces pushed an entire seabed into the sky. Paris needs no introduction either, yet few remember that the Eiffel Tower was originally intended as a temporary structure for the 1889 World's Fair, and was nearly torn down in 1909 before its usefulness as a radio transmission tower saved it from demolition. Lisbon's fado music emerged from the city's working-class neighborhoods in the 19th century, carrying an untranslatable emotion called saudade, a longing so specific to Portuguese culture that no single English word captures it. Amsterdam's canal ring, built during the Dutch Golden Age of the 17th century, was such an advanced feat of urban planning that it remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site recognized specifically for its engineering rather than any single building. Lake Bled in Slovenia holds a tiny island church where tradition insists a groom must carry his bride up 99 steps without stopping or speaking, a custom still practiced by couples today. The cliffs of Moher in Ireland have stood against the Atlantic for over 350 million years, rising more than 200 meters above crashing waves, and their base is riddled with sea caves carved slowly over unimaginable stretches of geological time. And finally, Venice, the city we began with, still floating impossibly across 118 islands connected by nearly 400 bridges, a place engineers once called impossible to build and now call impossible to save. Yet somehow, after 11 centuries, it still stands. The Rialto Bridge has spanned its Grand Canal since 1591. Gondolas still glide beneath the Bridge of Sighs, and each spring and autumn, when the crowds thin and the light turns golden across the lagoon, the city reveals the fragile, improbable beauty that first made it famous. From the volcanic fury of Etna to the frozen silence of Iceland's highlands, from castles built on toll roads to lakes older than human civilization itself, Europe remains a continent stitched together from improbable survival stories. Every stone, every canal, every mountain pass carries a history that could have ended differently, a flood that could have won, a war that could have destroyed what stands today, a king's obsession that could have been forgotten, a rising tide that could have won on a cold November night in 2019. Instead, these 50 places remain, waiting for the next traveler willing to see them before the tide. Quite literally in Venice's case, decides otherwise, before glaciers retreat another meter, before another crowd changes a quiet village forever, and before the fragile, improbable beauty of this continent quietly slips away for good.